Today we're doing a little benchmarking. I'm going to be comparing the card that I just received and unboxed, the RTX 4070 Super Founders Edition by NVIDIA, against my old card, the RTX 2070 Ventus GP by MSI. These cards are about 6 years apart in terms of their release, so this should be interesting. My test machine is a Core i5 9600K Intel CPU, 6 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM. It's not a current machine. It's a little older, but that's what I've got, and we're going to see how these two cards fare in 4 different games. These 4 games all include ray tracing, which is going to be a key point of contention for seeing how these cards compare. Ray tracing, if you're not familiar, is a rendering technique that can realistically simulate the lighting of a scene and its objects by rendering physically accurate shadows, reflections, refractions, and indirect lighting. The other thing is DLSS, which is an NVIDIA technology of upscaling. And you can see here there are different kind of modes. Like take here, the performance preset is basically a 2-to-1 in resolution. So it takes the lower resolution render of the game and upscales it to my display monitor's resolution, which is 1440. So here we have Control running on the old RTX 2070 at a native 1440p resolution at high settings with medium ray tracing. So the ray tracing is going to be pretty heavy in most of these games, especially a game like Control here. It's you see it in the reflections. You can see the entire scene rendered behind our character Jessie. She's in the reflections. The particles are in the reflections. All of the scene, and it has to render all that with the lighting technique that is ray tracing. So it's a lot more demanding, and this is the RTX 4070 Super, clearly handling it a lot better. The RTX 2070 was handling it at roughly 20-25 frames a second, and the RTX 4070 Super is handling it at roughly 45 to, on the upper end, 50 to 60. This game performs a lot better with obviously the newer card, and the ray tracing looks a lot better, I think. It just adds a lot to the scene. You can see lots of different effects happening between like the refractions of the glass and the effect particles. And as you can see here in the shelter, we're hitting a good 60 frames per second in a low, not taxing environment. So that's a good sign that this is going to be a kind of a stable, playable game with ray tracing on with this card. I played through Control with the RTX 2070. Did not use ray tracing because it was too demanding. Now here's an interesting game. Portal, which came out in 2007, was updated with ray tracing graphics in 2022 as a part of the RTX Remix project that NVIDIA has some hand in. And this is how the game ran at 1440p DLSS balance mode at high settings, which includes some ray tracing. So the graphics look wildly different and honestly transformative. This game looks totally different than it did in 2007, even on the 2070 here. But clearly it's not running very well at all. You're barely getting above 10 frames a second in a lot of scenes. So this game would not really be playable with the ray tracing on, and this is the key feature of Portal with RTX. You get these nice reflections and light bounces off of different surfaces and different material types from all different light sources. You can see in this scene, off of the water or off of the platform there, the light particle there in the air emitting as it's traveling through space. So here on the RTX 4070 Super, same settings, 1440p DLSS balance mode on high settings. This is easily playable at a roughly 60 frames per second experience. Some dips here into the 40s, but for the most part, it's running at a very stable frame rate, very playable. And yeah, this game still holds up today. Really nice looking with this upgrade to ray tracing. You can push the ray tracing even higher, but I didn't dare because it seems like it's very heavy on most hardware. So then at a native resolution for the 4070 Super, we're getting roughly a 30 to 40 frame experience, 30 FPS to 40 FPS. That's certainly playable. Doesn't look quite as smooth, but it's certainly a better experience than 5, 10, 15 frames per second on the 2070 that I was using before. So I would say this is actually playable now, and that's great. I might actually play this again at some point with the ray tracing features. Now here we have Doom Eternal from 2020. This is at native 1440p resolution at the Ultra Nightmare preset, graphics preset. And on the RTX 2070, it runs pretty well. This is going to be the one game in this suite that I've tested that is certainly CPU bound and not GPU bound. So we're going to notice some gains with the new card, but this game definitely has a lot more effects and physics and things that require the CPU to be engaged. And we'll notice at some point the CPU limiting our frame rate to a degree. You'll see the 100% usage on the CPU. So here is the game in the same settings on the 2070 with ray tracing on. We've obviously taken a hit in the frame rate, so we're looking at roughly 30 frames per second, sometimes lower, sometimes higher. This would be sort of playable, I think. Not the smoothest experience you'd want in Doom. You'd want a pretty smooth experience, and we'll get there with the new card. But yeah, I would say this is pretty barely playable. Like, it looks really nice, and the effects and the animations look good still, but they're not. I would say this game doesn't benefit as much with ray tracing. Now here with our RTX 4070 Super at 1440p native resolution and the same Ultra Nightmare graphics preset, we're at basically locked at the refresh rate of my monitor, which is 144 hertz. This felt great. This is how I'd want to play this game. At a good graphics preset, looks really nice. Doesn't have the ray tracing on, but for this game, it doesn't do a whole lot for it. It might add some effects here and there, but as you can see here with the ray tracing on, there's some reflections, there's some, refractions of glass or some puddles or some things here and there, but we've taken a hit to maybe 120 frames per second, and that's still very good, but it doesn't tank the frame rate like it does in, say, Control or RTX, the Portal with RTX. For this game, my priority would be the high refresh rate and a smooth experience. I wouldn't have ray tracing on. Even with the performance I'm getting here, I would just stick with the ray tracing off for this game, but good to know that it still works perfectly well with the ray tracing on. Now here's Alan Wake 2, a game that I really enjoyed and played on a different machine that I actually have that had an RTX 2080, and I had to fiddle with some settings, but it did run. Now you can see on the 2070 here at 1440p native resolution, high settings with medium ray tracing. This is heavy. This is intense. This is demanding. This is one of the most demanding games I think that has been released to date. And it does run on this card, which is great because some of the cards that are older than this don't actually run this game very well. But with this card, it does run for 15, 20 frames per second, in this outdoor scene with a lot of reflections, the light bouncing in, the sun setting. You can see the trees in the puddle here. And that's one of the things that you won't see if you don't have ray tracing on, because that's an actual simulation of how the light's bouncing from your perspective. So this looks really good, and it doesn't run very well. So then I was curious what it would take to get this to run decently well with the ray tracing on. And so I bumped up to DLSS performance mode. Okay, we're getting at 30 frames per second roughly, and that's decent, certainly playable. And then I tried the ultra performance mode of DLSS, and that actually got us a little higher, 45 frames per second, that would be even better. I think I used Ultra Performance to get a locked 60 or roughly 60 with the 2080. Now here in the side-by-side, the DLSS output is almost indistinguishable from the native resolution and with much more playable frame rates. Back here on the 2070 at native resolution, still in this daytime town scene, still doesn't run super well, maybe up to 25 at times. So this is not an action scene. There would be a lot more happening in an action scene, but you can see it has nice reflections. And then here with the RTX 4070 Super, kind of surprising, getting similar performance. This might not be totally accurate given that I've used OBS to record some of this footage, but it's running similarly, you know, up to 20 frames per second in this same scene. It's kind of surprising that this card wouldn't give you a better performance, but again, this is native resolution, same settings. Now with this RTX 4070, the 40 series cards actually have a feature called frame generation. That's part of DLSS, but it actually generates whole frames that are inserted into your GPU's already generated frames. And this is the result. You get a pretty playable experience above 30 frames per second. That's the only difference here. Native resolution and high settings with medium ray tracing. So I would say that's a win for having this new card. Here's the same card, the 4070 Super with DLSS quality mode. Kind of similar performance. You're getting maybe upwards of 45 frames per second. So how do you actually get a higher frame rate in this game? It's tricky. I had to resort to turning down the ray tracing, using DLSS performance mode, and using frame generation. But here's the result. Upwards of 60 FPS or higher in that internal scene in the cabin, but then out here, still 60 frames per second. In the Mine Palace, or whatever she calls it, maybe about the same, maybe even higher, 70 to 80 even. So that's what it takes to get a good frame rate in Alan Wake 2. It's a very demanding game, and I really enjoyed the game itself. Maybe I'll revisit testing this game and this card, the RTX 4070 Super, once I've upgraded some other parts of my machine. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.